Hello and welcome. In this lecture, we're going to be talking about the Florida land boom and bust of 1926 and how it really is a premonition of what is going to happen with the Wall Street crash and how people should have been really warned that this was happening. So what happens is in the 1920s that people end up getting unrealistic expectations of how good the government is doing and how good of prosperity is happening in the 20s, and this gets that people are end up borrowing on speculation, which is really saying that they are going to borrow money based off of future outcomes of how good the market is going to be in the future. And that's what really leads to the bust in 1926 in Florida, as well as the Wall Street crash that occurs. That people are buying too far out. And in fact, by the stock market crash in 1929, people had already bought almost out to 1934. And so it's this idea that you're buying on these speculative bubbles about how good this is going to happen, and you're buying mainly on credit. So at this time in the 20s, you could buy stock and only pay 1/10 of the initial value, and knowing that you were going to buy other stock. So you would buy on 1/10, and then what you would do is you would buy on the speculation of how it's going to be later and buy again on 1/10. So you're not actually buying for the full stock price, the price of the stock. You're buying on credit with this, and with the understanding that you're going to pay back that credit. Post into the Great Depression, is to note that it becomes illegal to buy stock on credit. That is overturned recently within the last 2 years, where people are now able to buy on credit again, which is very dangerous because you have to actually pay back that. If you do not, then all your debt is covered. So people are buying on small percentages for a large amount, and then they would use the speculation that they were going to get on the inflation from something else to buy more. And on top of that, you would buy it on that percentage, and then you would sell it either for more amounts, or you would just evenly trade it across. And so there's a lot of this that's going on. So why Florida, you ask? And by the way, when we're studying the stock market and the stock market crash, as well as the Florida land bust, you should keep this in mind for financial interactions of what not to do for your own personal life, because a lot of people overlook this, and it is starting to happen again. And one of the reasons we had the recession in 2008. Which was actually considerably worse than the stock market crash of 1929, but we had more systems in place to completely prevent all of the United States from crashing. So what ends up happening in Florida? So in Florida, with the advent of more air conditioning that happens, people began looking at Florida and saying, wait, we can actually start to live here a little bit more. And prices were very cheap at first in the early 1920s. And so people began to say, okay, well, we can buy this land and then we can improve it, or we could just sell it for more money. And there's great advertising schemes of saying, hey, retirees, you can come down to Florida and live in a warmer climate and have beach access and all these wonderful things that we have now. And because there's train lines that are going down there, you can come down here, live cheaply, and retire down here in the warmth and wonderful sun. And so people begin to buy land in the 20s, and they begin more and more land. Well, speculators come in, and these speculators are investment people are saying, okay, in fact, we are going to sell you these different lands. We're going to sell you things, saying, and then you're going to sell at a low price, and then buy it, and then resell it at a higher price, and just have that kind of a circulating price scheme that you're always going to sell for higher. Now, what ends up happening is that these speculators go down there and buy tracts of land and then advertise it that they have all these wonderful properties, like they are near the ocean, or they are fully developed, or this is the land that you're buying, when in reality you're buying into a swamp in the middle of Florida. And so people are getting really upset by this, and that the fact that people are coming down to move down there and finding out, in fact, they had bought some swampland instead of near the beach. What ends up happening is it becomes really the Venice of America in many ways. There's canal systems, there's damming that ends up happening. There's a lot of investment in businesses that are booming and hotels and whatnot. But what happens, unfortunately, in 1926 is 2 hurricanes go through, resulting in almost 400 deaths, and it pretty much collapses the housing market. So all these debts have to be repaid, and people can't do this. So what ends up happening is a vast migration from Florida by people in poor, that are newly poor. There are developments that are unfinished, and like amusement parks that are unfinished, that are just wasted away. With minimal regulation in the stock exchange, this was seen as that all these people lost all their money and there was nothing they can do about it. In fact, you have a huge dip in 1926 as a result of this Florida land boom and bust that happens. It really puts to light the understanding that there are not federal regulations to regulate the stock market, that it develops that people buying on speculation and on credit was an unsound financial practice and created unrealistic expectations for people to do this. It is a complete catastrophe in Florida, particularly in Miami. Miami in 1920 was about 30,000 people. By 1925, it's 75,000 people. It was attractive for many people, but then these hurricanes went through, and on top of it, you have this complete financial collapse that happens. Land prices plummet, and wealthier people and people who are doing investments end up moving out of Florida. It is kind of what happens in the 1929 in many ways, that it is traumatic and it has a lot of ruin, because there was a lot of influential people who were buying and selling on credit. They destroyed all the savings of thousands who were deceived by false hopes. The stock market prices exceeded their real values, and this is from buying on speculation. And actually, though the crash happens in October of 1929, the stock market had stalled in June of 1929. It has a stall that happens in June, and it completely almost collapses but doesn't, and then it's just a slow decline until October. Investments and trust and buying on margin and all these speculations that end up happening have people's houses possessed. There's respectable figures that are completely removed out of even the limelight. In October, with the Wall Street crash, you end up having people jump off buildings, and you have mass suicides that happen. You have banks that close, and it's important to note that only 1% of the entire population of the United States had invested in the stock market. And those are the most influential 1%. The people that we've been talking about that had all the wealth, they are affected. And so for the first time, you have a collapse of the top 1% of the United States, and that really trickles down to everyone, because those people who owned all the wealth and were paying other companies and factories and stuff, they closed them. The banks begin to collapse, and this is where we're going to end the lecture right now, because we're going to be talking about that collapse next week and into the Great Depression. So I hope you learned a little bit about the Florida land boom and how that really is the warning sign that should have occurred for Wall Street. Have a wonderful day.